Welcome to this section where we'll dive into malware. There's all kind of malware. And in order to defend against malware, we must know what to defend against. As the saying goes, we learn to build walls not by our friends, but by our enemies. In this section, you will learn about different types of malware, like reverse shells, remote access trojans or backdoors, keyloggers, and other types of malicious software. So they will do all kind of different things, and you'll learn about what these types of malware actually do in the real world. Now, this contains hypothetical malware codes, and you can then play around with it and better understand why malware can be such a threat to computer users and how you can defend against it. Because once you know what malware does, you can create better defenses against it. So in this section, I'll be using a lot of Python code. You should already be familiar with the Python programming language before starting this section, because we'll be using a lot of Python code. If you're familiar with it, it will be easy to follow along. Otherwise, you can try to follow along, but you might be a bit confused by all the code on the screen. So if you're up for it, let's go. Hey tech enthusiasts, welcome back. Let's dive into the fascinating realm of keyloggers. But before we jump in, let's go over some of the basics. So what are these keyloggers? So keyloggers is either a software or a hardware that registers any key press a user does on the computer. So as mentioned, it can be either hardware or software. So with hardware, what happens is that they will plug in a keylogger, for example this one, between your USB keyboard and the computer, and this device will then register any key press. So you'll see they have it old hardware with new hardware, and also with older hardware. You'll see these are the old PS2 plugs. So there are many keylogger programs. Some of them work using Wi-Fi, so whatever you press will be sent over the Wi-Fi. And there's all kind of keyloggers. So these are hardware based, but this course is all about software. So keyloggers can exist in software as well. And the only thing that these keyloggers do is register key presses so that the attacker can then later read whatever the user was doing on the computer. So here we have a simple Python program. It's still an empty file for this Python program. First thing we'll do is we'll import the keyboard and threading module. So the keyboard module allows you to read keys from the keyboard, which is kind of obvious with a keylogger. Make sure to install that. So open a new terminal and install the keylogger module. You can do that like this: pip3 install keyboard. If you press enter, you'll see it's installing the keyboard module, which we'll need to read keys from the keyboard. Then let's define a function. So this Python function, it will simply read out the key and print it to the screen. Now you'll see here it has a variable log. So we'll create a log that stores every key. So let's make the most basic program where we only output the key press. So let's run this. And you see we must run this program as root, as the administrator. So we're going to run it as root. Now let's say the user starts to use the computer. So they might open a file explorer and they might type something here like user share word lists, or maybe they are opening a text editor and typing something. And you'll see the keylogger is registering it. Now this is not very readable for us. We simply see the text in the terminal. So what we're going to do is we're going to store that into a file, and will be a readable text file. So to do that, we define the log variable and we'll add that to the log. So you'll see here every key will be added to the log. If the key is a space or any function key, those are also registered. So this little snippet here is just to make sure that we can register the space and the function key. Then we call the save log function, which doesn't exist yet, so we'll add it. So here we go, we have the save log function. So this function just registers the keys and add it to the log variable. Then we call save log, uses the same log variable and writes it to that file keylog.txt. Now if we clear the screen and we run it, we have to run this as administrator because it will register any key press on your Linux system. It's the X Windows system, so not wavelet. And now we can open, for example, any program, let's say a terminal, and suppose we were typing something. Let's open a file explorer as well. Let's say we type something, You can type all kind of commands. And okay, let's close this and see inside the keylog file. So you'll see the commands we typed here. See, we type pwd, and we type the command to name -a. You'll see here c \d/ clear screen. So anything you type is now registered in the keylog. So let's say we open a web browser and we go to some website, say LinkedIn or whatever, and say we type a username password. And now we try to log in. You see obviously that won't work because it's not a real account. It's for demonstration purposes of why hackers will use keyloggers. So you'll see that now it went to LinkedIn, and then we see what the user types, so user@email.com, and also what their password is. So keyloggers can be really mean because they will register any key press, so also any passwords a user types into the computer. Now this is a software keylogger, and if you wouldn't know, then it is running in the background. Software keyloggers, okay, you might be able to detect them using antivirus depending on the virus software quality. For hardware keyloggers, it's a bit more difficult because if your device is not visible or if they build it into the device, you cannot see that. So this is what the final program looks like. We have the keyboard module, then this is for the variable that hosts the file, a simple key press function that's added to the log, calls the save function, and the save function writes it to the file. Now in general with programming, it's a good idea to split different functions. So if you have a lot of code, split it into different functions. Of course, the save log can be in one function, that would work. But for clarity, it's often a good idea to have multiple functions of no more than 10 or 12 lines. So this is the program. It will just register any key press you do on your Linux computer. Hi people, and welcome back. Here we have Kali Linux, the system often used for hacking and cybersecurity. So in this video we'll be explaining RATs, Remote Access Trojan, or simply backdoor. So with a backdoor, hackers have an easy way into a system without actually doing that much. It's a malicious program that runs in the victim's computer, and then once you hacker connects to that computer, they can simply do whatever they want with that software. So to give you an example, here we have the terminal, and we're going to scan for computers on the local network with this command. And you'll see it just scanned. Let me enlarge the font here. So we just scanned the network devices, and you'll see we found 2 computers this network. So let's say this one is running a RAT. Then we can connect to it with, for example, telnet. We can type telnet with the address of the computer and then port that the application is running on. So let's say port 5000. And now we can run commands. For example, let's check the system, and you see we can now remotely control this computer. So you'll see that is the computer on the right here, and we can now run any commands, and that command is executed on this computer. And all they did was run a program. You see here rats.py, so it's running a rat type of malware that basically opens a backdoor to the computer, and then they can run whatever commands they want. For example, I can open the file explorer here. Let's say they run the command mkdir for make directory and create a directory hacked, and you'll see that directory is now created. So this is a remote access Trojan, or RAT, or simply backdoor, and it allows a hacker to simply connect to the computer and run whatever commands they want. Now RATs come in all kind of formats, so there might be a Python script, it might be an executable for your system, or perhaps some other format. Now it can also be another computer system, so it's not limited to Ubuntu Linux. You can run it on other Linux systems. It can run on Windows computers, on Mac computers, and any computer systems, even phones. So if a RAT is running, you can connect to that simply by connecting to the network port. So you'll see here is a RAT program running. So normally what a hacker will do is, let's say this. So let's say it's running a RAT software. So typically what a hacker will do is scan who's on the network. They'll find the computer on the network, and then they'll scan for open services. So it might be FTP, SSH or other kind of services, remote desktop maybe. So they do an nmap scan using the address of the computer. In this case, this address will be different if you use it on your own local network. And they might find open ports. So in this case, you don't see any open ports here. You might try to do a more intense scan, so from 1 to 500 and not just the default ports. And they might discover there's something running there that is a backdoor. So then they could be able to connect to it with the target IP address and port and try to interact. If it is a backdoor, they can then run whatever commands they want. So that is a remote access Trojan, RAT or backdoor. Typically these get blocked by a firewall, but it really depends, because in this case this Ubuntu Linux computer, so this computer on the right is not running any firewall. That's why on the local network we can simply connect to it. So firewalls can block this, and oftentimes antivirus software can find this kind of backdoors in all cases. And it's basically all the hacker has to do is connect to the network IP address and ports, and then they can take over the computer. So there's not really a lot of advanced hacking going on. It's simply a type of malicious software that opens the back door, so to say, for the hacker. So I hope that is a good explanation of what a remote access Trojan is. I'll see you in the next video. Hey, and welcome back. So any remote access Trojan, any RAT or Trojan backdoor, it uses a client-server system. So here we have a client-server example. We have on the left the client computer and on the right the server computer. You'll see it sends a request and it returns a response. It's the basic idea of client-server. Now in this example you'll see the server is some expensive desktop computer, but it doesn't have to be the case. A server can be any computer. Basically a server is a program that allows for communication one way and to the other, so back and forth. It can be a laptop computer, can be a desktop computer, or it can be some industry computer. The main thing to remember here is that a server is just an app running on a computer and allows for other computers in the network to interact with it. So let's program our RAT. So the first thing we'll need is the socket module. The socket module allows for network communication, and we'll start the server as you see in this example, or in this example we'll need to have a server, so a server app, and for that we simply call the function start server that we define here with our own IP address, so this will make it available on the network, and any port you want. And so what it will do is we'll start listening for interactions on the network. The next thing we'll need is it needs to run commands. So the person connecting to the server should be able to run commands on this computer. In order to do that, we load the subprocess module. Now with the subprocess module, all it does is it starts programs. So we'll create another function, execute commands, and we'll use the subprocess module simply to execute a command. Now a command is anything received by the server. Now you'll see this is the two steps of the remote access or the Trojan or the backdoor. All it does is start a server on the network and run any commands. So it should run any command that the client sends to the computer. Then you'll see a lot of code here, but all it does is run command. You see here, execute command. Then this runs a command. It was quite a long line of text, but this just runs a command, and it returns the output of the command to result, and then it returns result. So as you might think, this function execute command, it simply executes a command on the computer system, and then it returns the result unless there is some error. Then the server needs to be started. So this is just some generic server code. You can copy and paste that. So what we do here is start a server. It starts listening for a connection. Then if someone connects, it accepts the connection. You'll see here .accept. And then while they are connected, receive data. You see here, receives data indefinitely because of the while loop. So it starts receiving data. And if it receives data, you'll see here data, it passes that into execute commands. So it runs any commands that it receives as data, saves the response, and then sends the response over to the attacker. So without that line, the whole program would still work, but the attacker wouldn't know what is going on. So he would type commands but not have any response. So that's why the response is then returned to the attacker. So this is the remote access Trojan you saw in the last video. It simply listens for commands. So if I start a terminal, and let's say we pick another port just for fun, let's say instead of 123, we pick 313. Then we'll use low ports. By the way, you must run it as administrator, as root. If you use higher ports, you can run it as a regular user. So, okay, let's pick another number then. Let's pick 1212. So now let's run the program. We run this program. So anybody on the network can now connect to this computer on this port and should be able to then take over control of this computer. So let's try that. First, who's on the network? So we do a quick scan. We'll see this computer on the network. We know already that it's running the red, so let's connect to that port. Use telnet with the IP address and then the port 1212. We connect to this computer, to this server. So this computer is the client, and now we can type any command. Let's say pwd, and that it shows the directory. Check the system. You'll see it's the Ubuntu system, and basically we are remotely controlling this computer. So this is a backdoor program. It's a program that you can start in, or any victim can start, and then someone on the same network or perhaps on the internet is then able to directly connect to the victim's computer. So this is called a backdoor. Now many times firewalls block this. So they will say, hey, someone is trying to connect to your computer, so they are blocked. And also the antivirus software blocks this. So what hackers will often do is use reverse shells, where the victim is not connecting to the hacker is not connecting to the victim, but instead the victim will connect to the computer. So we'll discuss this more later. In this case, we just have the client connecting to the server. So the most basic setup where the hacker connects into the computer. In the real world, it's often reverse, but a bit complicated, so we'll get into that later. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next videos.